He didn't knock. He still had a key, left over from when we mistook silence for peace. He set the envelope beside my son Caleb's cereal bowl and said, "It's done." Evelyn was clear. Betrayal reads cleaner than it lives. He tapped a signature. A date, a notary seal. "You're not in it," he added, almost kind, like weather instead of worth. Then, lighter, "We can talk about swapping weekends, since you'll have less going on." I didn't touch the paper. The refrigerator hummed. Mark knows my face, neutral, flat, the one he called, calm when I was a new night shift nurse. He always mistook that calm for fear. "That was his first mistake today. You're sure you want to be here?" I asked. "With Caleb. Due back at 4? He shrugged like a man who believed he still held the script. "He'll adjust. We all will." Everybody knows Evelyn didn't want the estate fought over. She wanted clean lines. Clean lines. The envelope was cheap manila. The will was folded into thirds with the precision of someone who practices making messes look neat. Evelyn wasn't. My mother. She was my mother-in-law for 8 years and my ally for 10 afterward, because kindness outlives marriage. She showed up when Caleb ran a fever and I was on hour 11 of 12. When the hospital cut staffing, she left casserole on my steps with a card, "Don't apologize for taking care of people." When the diagnosis came, she didn't ask for bravery. She asked me to keep my head. Evelyn never signed anything. Without reading it aloud, I said, "She changed." He answered too fast. "People do." I nudged the envelope toward him an inch. "Not rejection, survey." "When?" "A month ago." He coughed. "Right before she, you know." He could forge a future but couldn't finish a sentence. "Where?" "At her house. Dana and I were there." The notary came by. He tapped the seal, a magician forcing a card. "No need to be difficult, Paige." I let my name rest between us, Paige Carter, square-shouldered as a signature. I signed it the day I filed for separation after finding his bright messages. To Ella, Pilates. Wink. On his phone. I sign when necessary. I don't perform for paper. Last fall Evelyn told me Caleb's college came first, I said. She asked for a 529 plan. That was months before hospice. He glanced at the microwave clock, as if time could co-sign. She had other wishes. The smell of cinnamon and bleach rose, her hospice room, the aide's warm cloth, the radio. Low. Evelyn's voice then, "Keep your head, Paige. They win when you rush." "It sits in me like protocol." Mark softened. "Look, I'm not your enemy. This is paperwork." Evelyn wanted to consolidate. He gestured at my kitchen, lunches, forms, the life he visits without carrying. "Consolidate what?" "The properties," he said. "The accounts. There's a family trust now. Cleaner for taxes." "Who's trustee?" His smile didn't reach anywhere sincere. "Dana. For now." There it was, the quiet knife. Dana, his sister, who plans events like operations and keeps score like a bookie. I lifted the top sheet. I didn't read the bequests. My eye went to the date, 3 days after the second morphine increase. The notary block carried the name of a woman from a mortgage office across town. The ink on the signature was too even. The capital E in Evelyn's name slanted right. In every birthday card, that E hooked left like a fish. Evelyn's hands shook at the end. I said, "People. Steady up to sign," he replied. "Adrenaline." "From what?" He lifted and dropped his shoulders. "Closure." Outside, the garbage truck exhaled. My phone buzzed with a school nurse reminder. Life kept time with itself while the man in my kitchen tried to rewrite a dead woman's last word. "Leave the envelope," I said. "I'll review." He brightened, mistaking compliance for surrender. "Good. And think about the weekends. A little flexibility helps everyone." I walked him to the door. He waited for the plea that used to end our arguments. It didn't come. I took his key, the one he'd never returned because we never made a ceremony of endings. The metal was warm from his palm. Evelyn told me to keep my head, I said, pocketing the key. I'm going to do that now. He tried to catch my eyes. I let him miss. He stepped onto the porch and met the door already closing. The lock clicked. Quiet isn't passive when you choose it. It's a scalpel. I set the envelope on the table and opened a new folder on my laptop, estate evidence. Caleb's cereal had softened into a pale, unthreatening mush. I thought of Evelyn's steady hooking left, and how some letters refuse to face the direction you point them. Some women, too, of funerals in late spring feel wrong, sunlight making everything too visible, too warm for grief to breathe. Evelyn's headstone was still unpolished, her name hidden under the haze of fresh carving dust. Caleb stood on my right, in the navy blazer she'd bought him for last year's school recital. He didn't fidget. Evelyn had taught him that funerals were for standing still and remembering, not for wringing hands. Dana moved through the crowd like a hostess at a fundraiser, air-kissing distant cousins, making sure the platters stayed full. The family had rented a tent for the reception on the cemetery lawn, linen tablecloths billowing in the breeze, pitchers of lemonade sweating in the heat. She caught my eye, smiled with perfect teeth, and drifted over with the timing of someone who enjoys corners. Paige, she said, the syllable clipped like she was calling a dog. You should know, family keeps family assets. Evelyn would want that. It wasn't a warning, it was a verdict, pre-delivered. I felt Caleb's small fingers wrap tighter around mine, the way he used to grip my shirt when strangers tried to touch his hair. I didn't answer. Evelyn once told me Dana liked answers she could misquote. Dana leaned in, her perfume, a sharp, expensive floral, cutting through the scent of cut grass. It's cleaner this way. Less fighting. Cleaner for whom? I asked, voice low enough that only she could hear, for all of us. She brushed an invisible speck from her sleeve, glancing toward Mark. He was at the other end of the tent, laughing with a man from the funeral home. That laugh used to pull me in, now it just marked exits. Caleb tugged my hand once, a silent signal. I looked down, met his eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Kids know when adults are drawing lines in a place they can't see. The minister began a soft prayer, and the conversations dropped to a murmur. Dana didn't move away. She stood beside me as if we were allies, not opponents already filing opposing claims in our minds. After the prayer, people began to drift toward the parking lot. Dana touched my elbow. Mark told me you've seen the will. You should consider the tax implications of contesting. I pictured the date on the document, the flawless ink, the wrong-leaning E. I'll consider the legal implications of not contesting. Her smile thinned. You'll just make it ugly. It's already ugly. I stepped aside, letting Caleb walk ahead toward the car. He needed distance from her voice. So did I. The drive home was quiet. Caleb asked if we could plant the marigolds Evelyn had left in her shed. They'll die if we don't, he said. His voice was matter of fact, not pleading. We spent the rest of the afternoon in the yard. I dug shallow holes while he tipped the pots, crumbling soil into the earth. Evelyn's handwriting was on the plant tags, block letters, tidy and deliberate. Her ease hooked left. By evening, the house smelled like dirt and sun-warmed petals. Caleb fell asleep on the couch, and I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up the county records portal, searched the notary's name from the will. Her commission was active. She'd notarized 2 real estate transactions in March, 3 in April, and Evelyn's will in May. The same week Evelyn was barely conscious. I printed the log. Then I opened another tab and searched probate timelines. 6 months to file a contest. No extensions without cause. I had time, but time was a weapon only if you used it. The cursor blinked on a blank document. I typed a title, Evelyn Carter, will contest evidence. Underneath, I wrote the first entry, May 14th, notary stamp on alleged will. Evelyn heavily medicated. Unlikely able to comprehend or sign, I closed the laptop when I heard Caleb stir. He walked into the kitchen, hair sticking up, eyes heavy. "Are they going to take your house?" he asked. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "No one takes what's mine without a fight." He nodded like that was enough. For now, it was. I tucked him into bed, the marigold scent still clinging to my hands. Outside his window, the flowers caught the porch light, small bursts of gold in the dark. Evelyn used to say you plant things not to keep them forever, but to prove you were there. I planned to make sure her proof stayed where it belonged. The next morning, I woke before Caleb, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint hiss of the radiator. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the manila envelope like it was a live wire. It's strange how betrayal isn't always a single moment, it's an accumulation, a slow layering of control that feels normal until you start peeling it back. Mark and Dana were trying to erase me with paperwork, but I'd been trained for this. Not in law, but in patterns. Nursing teaches you to track changes in vital signs, to notice when something that looks stable isn't anymore. I opened a legal pad and started listing the patterns. Not the ones in the will, those would come later, but the ones that had trained me to accept half-truths, joint passwords, Mark's favorite phrase when we opened the first joint account. But every time I asked for the login, he'd change it for security. Security meant his access to everything, my access to nothing. Keys that didn't fit. He had keys to my apartment when we separated, keys to my garage when I bought this house. Somehow, I never had keys to the storage unit where he kept family documents. Surprise signatures, papers slipped in between school permission slips and delivery receipts. "Just sign here, it's for the insurance." No copies. No explanation. I'd let those things slide because I had bigger fires, Caleb's asthma, night shifts, bills that didn't wait. Now, those tiny exclusions had prepared the ground for this, a forged will that assumed I'd be too tired, too outmatched to notice. So I thought about the night I realized Mark had rerouted Evelyn's medical updates through Dana instead of me. Evelyn had called me directly for months, but suddenly her voicemail was full, and every time I asked how she was, Dana would reply with, "Oh, she's fine, don't worry." It wasn't fine. I saw it the moment I walked into Evelyn's hospice room, her skin gray, her lips dry, her eyes flickering like a candle in a draft. The cinnamon and bleach smell came back to me now, sharp as alcohol on a wound. She'd squeezed my hand then and whispered, "Keep your head." She knew what was coming, even if I didn't. I turned to my laptop. I pulled up my email and searched for everything Evelyn had ever sent me about her estate. There weren't many, just a couple of notes about Caleb's college fund and one PDF attachment of an older will. I opened it. The difference in her signature was stark, handwritten, shaky but alive, the loop on the Y curling like she'd always done. I printed it side by side with the new will. The forgery was almost elegant in its precision. Too precise. Real. Writing breathes, this one didn't. The more I stared, the colder I felt. Mark's smirk at my kitchen table wasn't confidence, it was a dare. He thought I'd fold, the way I had over joint passwords and storage unit keys. The phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the notification appeared. Dana's voice, syrupy but strained. "Paige, we should talk before you do anything rash. Mark's worried you'll drag this through court. Let's meet for coffee, just us girls." Girls. I saved the voicemail in 3 places. I added an entry to my evidence file. A June 2nd, voicemail from Dana implying intent to avoid court. Tone, coercive. When Caleb woke, I made pancakes. He told me he dreamed of marigolds growing in the kitchen. Evelyn was there, he said, but she didn't talk. She just pointed at the flowers. I smiled, but inside, I knew Evelyn wasn't the type to waste words, alive or in memory. If she pointed, she meant look closer. After breakfast, I drove Caleb to school. On the way home, I stopped by the bank. The clerk recognized me from my hospital rounds. Her father had been one of my patients. She was careful, discreet. When I asked about recent activity in Evelyn's accounts. She hesitated, then told me there had been large transfers in the days before her death. All into something called Carter Family Trust. I thanked her, walked back to my car, and sat with the engine off. Large transfers meant liquidating assets. A new trust meant someone had given themselves the keys to the vault. I already knew who'd on. My legal pad, I wrote the day's final note in block letters. This isn't about inheritance. It's about erasure. And I wasn't about to be erased. The hospice room had one narrow window, facing west. In the evenings, the light came in low and heavy, stretching shadows across the bed like a second blanket. That smell, cinnamon from the tea bags on the counter, bleach from the cleaning cart in the hall, had lodged itself deep in me. Even now, months later, I could summon it like an unwelcome memory. Evelyn's hands had been cold that day, her nails clipped short. I'd brought her Caleb's latest drawing, a lopsided marigold and a house with 3 windows. She held it with more care than she ever gave to the important papers. Mark and Dana kept waving under her nose. They'll want you quiet, she'd whispered. Her voice was gravel, each word costing something. They'll call it peace. It's just their version of silence. I'd smiled because that's what she needed to see, steady, unshaken. She'd squeezed my hand, the kind of grip you can't fake when the muscles are weak. Keep your head, Paige. Let them think you've got nothing. Back in my kitchen. Now, coffee cooling beside the evidence folder, I replayed that moment on a loop. It wasn't just a warning, it was instruction. Evelyn had been preparing me. Even then, the "be grateful" line had been their go-to for years. When Mark forgot Caleb's school play, be grateful he's working hard for the family. When Dana failed to invite me to the holiday dinner until the morning of, be grateful we're including you at all. Gratitude, weaponized, was just another way to make you accept less. I flipped through the printed copies of Evelyn's old will, comparing each page to the forged one. The older will left her house to me in trust for Caleb until he turned 25. The new will handed it to Dana outright, with a vague note about a future support for Caleb as determined by trustee discretion. In other words, if Dana felt like it, I checked the property records again. Evelyn's house was still in her name. That wouldn't last long if the forged will stood. The trust transfers could happen quietly, one form at a time, until the trail was cold. The urge to call Mark and tear into him rose sharp and hot. But Evelyn's voice in my head held it down. Keep your head. So I didn't call. I documented in my evidence log. I wrote a comparison of will clauses, major shift in beneficiary for primary residence. Change coincides with period of sedation in hospice. Then I opened a new tab and started searching notary fraud cases in the state. There were more than I expected, most settled quietly, a few leading to criminal charges. I made note of the attorneys who'd handled them. At 18 noon, my phone buzzed, unknown number again. This time, it was Mark's voice, flat but edged. Paige, don't get pulled into this. You've got Caleb to think about. The house isn't worth a fight. He paused like he expected me to jump in. I didn't. Besides, he added, Dana's already covered some of Evelyn's debts. You don't want to be on the hook for those. I saved the voicemail, labeling it threat framed as concern. Then I sat back and let the quiet fill the room. That's when I noticed something odd on the forged will's witness page. Both witnesses had signed with the same pen, the ink still dark and wet looking. In real life, witness signatures often varied, different pens, different pressures. This was too neat. I jotted it down, identical ink, possible single signing session, not 2 separate witnesses as claimed. Caleb came home from school with a scraped knee and a crumpled permission slip for a field trip. While I cleaned the cut, he told me about a classmate whose dad promised him a bike if the judge said yes. I didn't ask. Kids pick up more from court dramas than we realize. After he went to bed, I sat in the living room with the lights low, staring at the marigolds outside. Their gold heads were still upright despite the evening wind. I thought about how Evelyn had once said, strong roots don't panic in storms. She'd planted those flowers knowing she wouldn't see them bloom. Maybe she trusted me to keep them standing. Maybe she trusted me to do more than that. The forged will wasn't just a theft. It was an attempt to uproot everything she'd left me, her trust, her place in Caleb's life, her belief that I could stand my ground. I wasn't going to let that happen. The hospital parking lot at shift change is a mess of exhaust, tired faces, and quick, clipped goodbyes. I parked in the far corner where the lights only half reached, the way I always do when I need to think. Without eyes on me. The night air carried the faint metallic tang of rain on asphalt. I just finished a 12-hour shift, 2 codes, 1 combative patient, and a fractured wrist from an icy porch. My brain should have been running on fumes, but the second I turned off the ignition, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail that I didn't listen right away. Instead, I opened the file app on my phone. 3 new folders I'd created this week. Stared back at me, Dana, coercion, Mark, deflection, and joint, estate pressure. Every voicemail, every text, every accidental email forward went into one of them. It was the digital equivalent of laying out scalpels before a procedure, organized, sterile, ready. I pressed play. Mark's voice, falsely casual, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Think about Caleb. Courts get ugly. You won't like where this ends." Save to Mark, deflection, next, Dana. Page, honey, lawyers will drain whatever's left. If you just sign the agreement now, we can make sure you're taken care of in other ways. Dana, coercion, another from Mark, this one shorter. Don't embarrass yourself. Mark, deflection. I replayed that last one twice. Not because it hurt, those words stopped having weight years ago, but because I wanted to note the exact tone. Flat, almost bored. The sound of a man who believed he'd already won. I sat there a while, engine off, phone warm in my hand. I thought about the years of little manipulations, things I'd brushed off because they didn't seem worth the fight. The forgotten invitations, the checks lost in the mail, the way they'd positioned themselves between me and Evelyn. At family gatherings like they were shielding her from me, and then I thought about the forged will. The date. The ink. The identical witness signatures. Every detail was another stitch in the same pattern. My reflection in the windshield looked steadier than I felt. But steadiness is performance, too. It buys time. Before heading home, I called Breck. We'd met once. He was a lawyer who handled a malpractice claim for one of my colleagues. Direct, unsentimental, the kind of man who would rather show you the statute than give you a pep talk. When he answered, I didn't waste time. I think my ex and his sister forged a will. I have evidence, copies of both versions, voicemail pressure, and financial records that don't match the timeline. He didn't sound surprised. You want to fight it? Yes. Then start sending me everything you have. And stop replying to them. Every word they get from you is leverage they haven't earned. That fit perfectly with Evelyn's keep your head. Silence wasn't just dignity, it was strategy. I hung up and opened my email. Forwarded Breck the files. Attached scan notes from my legal pad. Uploaded the old will and the forged one. Every piece was a thread I could weave into a net. Driving home, the streets were slick with fresh rain. The marigolds in my front yard were bent from the weight of water but still rooted, still upright. Caleb was asleep on the couch again, the TV humming low. I covered him with a blanket and went to the kitchen. The manila envelope was still on the table. I didn't open it. I didn't need to, not tonight. The will wasn't going anywhere, but neither was I. I powered down my phone, slid it into the evidence folder in my laptop bag, and sat at the window. The rain eased into a drizzle. The smell of wet earth came through the cracked pane, grounding me in a way no threat could shake. I'd been told to be grateful, to stay quiet, to accept less. Not anymore. This wasn't Evelyn's first storm. It wasn't mine either. And storms pass, but only if you stand through them. The next morning, I spread both wills across my dining table, each page under a separate sheet of glass so the edges wouldn't curl. On one, the ink wavered, breath and bone in every stroke. On the other, the pen had glided too perfectly, like it wasn't writing so much as tracing. The forged one bore a neat rectangular stamp, Notary Public, State of Washington, May 14th. That date hit me like a cold compress, 3 days after Evelyn's second morphine increase. 2 days before she stopped opening her eyes entirely. I'd been there that week, sitting beside her bed between shifts. Her voice had dwindled to a few syllables. She couldn't even hold a pen without her wrists trembling. I'd brushed her hair and read aloud from Caleb's school newsletter, even though she probably couldn't follow the words, and yet, according to this document, she'd signed a brand new will, initialed changes, and smiled for 2 witnesses. I opened my laptop and pulled up Dana's social media. I'd stopped following her years ago, but public posts have a way of betraying their own stories. Sure enough, her profile was still open to friends of friends. There it was, a beachside cocktail photo dated May 14th. Caption: Cabo's sun heals everything. The geotag was clear. She wasn't at Evelyn's bedside. She was 2,000 miles away. I screenshotted the post, saving it to a new folder labeled Alibis and Contradictions. Underneath, I copied the notary's stamp from the will. Side by side, the absurdity sharpened, Dana's cocktail hand on one screen, her witness's signature on another. I called the hospice nurse who'd been on duty that week, Melissa. She remembered Evelyn clearly. She couldn't speak more than a word or two by then, Melissa said. Writing? No. Holding a pen? Maybe for a second, but not to sign pages. I thanked her and took careful notes. Mid-afternoon, Mark called. Again. I let it go to voicemail. You're not making friends, Paige. The will's legitimate. Let it go before you embarrass yourself in court. Embarrass yourself. They always fall back on shame when power starts to slip. I saved the voicemail to Mark, deflection, tagging it with today's date. When Caleb got home, he found me still at the dining table, pages and screenshots spread out like a caseboard. Is this homework? He asked. In a way, I said. It's about telling the truth and showing proof. He nodded, then pulled a marigold petal from his pocket. This fell off outside. Can we keep it? I folded it in a slip of paper and tucked it into my legal pad. Proof takes many forms. That night, I sent Breck an email as subject: notary date and witness contradiction. Evidence shows notary date matches Evelyn's heavy sedation period. Witness: Dana documented in Cabo on same date via public social media. Hospice nurse confirms inability to sign at that stage. Request: file motion to subpoena notary's log and depose witnesses. His reply was short, surgical: this is the fracture we needed. Sit tight. I closed my laptop and stood at the window. The marigolds outside swayed under the porch light. They weren't untouched by the wind, but they were still there. Roots intact. Inside, the table full of glass-covered pages felt less like chaos and more like a map. A forged will is just a lie in ink, but the truth, patient, documented, undeniable, has weight. And I was just getting started. By Saturday morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp and clean. Caleb was at a friend's sleepover, which meant I had the house to myself for the first time all week. I spread the wills out again, this time under the brightest light in the kitchen, a mug of coffee cooling beside my elbow. My hands, no handwriting. The way they know a pulse. In nursing, you learn to see the difference between weakness and absence, between a tremor and a deliberate line. Evelyn's genuine signature had character, pressure variations, small hesitations where her hand caught up to her mind. The capital E in her name hooked to the left, as if she were tugging the letter backward. On the forged will, the E leaned right, a tidy flare at the top like something copied from a sample. The loop on the Y in Evelyn was too round, too perfect, with none of the small, jerky lift she always made before trailing off. I set the pages side by side, tracing the air above them without touching. In one, the line breathes, in the other, it's just ink on paper. I knew the difference in my bones. I took high-resolution photos, then zoomed in until the fibers of the paper were visible on my laptop screen. The pressure in the forged signature was uniform, no deeper grooves where a hand had pressed harder, no faint starts and stops. This wasn't just forged. It was traced, likely over a printed outline. I added the photos to estate evidence, labeling them signature analysis, Tremor vs. Trace.by mid-morning, I was in my car, headed to the library's archives. Breck had suggested finding older documents, anything Evelyn had signed over the years, to build a pattern of her handwriting. In the property records, I found 3 deeds from the past decade, each with her unmistakable left-leaning "ed." While I copied the pages, I thought about the times Evelyn had signed things in front of me. Birthday cards, school permission slips, even a grocery store loyalty form. She always wrote slowly, careful to make her name legible. I remembered her pausing mid-signature once, laughing that her hand was running out of gas. That was the kind of detail no forger could imitate. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail from Dana. "Paige, we're offering you a settlement. It's fair, and it avoids dragging Evelyn's name through court. Call me back by Monday." I saved it immediately to Dana of coercion. A fair settlement meant they knew the ground beneath them was cracking. That night, after Caleb was asleep, I drafted an affidavit outlining my observations about the signature differences. I included the nurse's perspective, how years of monitoring fine motor skills had trained me to detect subtle changes. I backed it with examples from Evelyn's authentic signatures, complete with dates and contexts. Before shutting down my laptop, I sent the file to Breck. His reply came 10 minutes later, "Perfect. This will corner the notary before deposition." I closed the lid, feeling that rare, quiet shift inside. The moment you stop playing defense and start dictating the pace outside, the marigolds stood still in the night air, petals tight against the chill. They didn't have to bloom loud to prove they were alive. Neither did I. Sunday morning, Caleb was at his dad's for a few hours. I used the quiet to dive into the bank records I'd pulled from the clerk who recognized me at the branch. They weren't full statements, just transaction summaries, but they were enough to spot the fracture. On May 13th, the day before Evelyn supposedly signed the new will, 3 large transfers left her primary account. 2 went into accounts labeled Carter Family Trust. The third landed in a personal account under Dana's name. I highlighted the amounts, enough to cover a year of private school tuition, or a down payment on a second home. I printed the page and slipped it into my evidence binder. Underneath, I clipped the forged will. The timeline was too neat. May 13th, assets moved. May 14th, new will assigned. May 17th, Evelyn stopped speaking. I took a break to refill my coffee, then opened the PDF copy of the forged will Mark had emailed me, for my records. Most people think PDFs are static, they're not. I right-clicked, checked document properties. And there it was, metadata. The A author field read Dana C, and the A last modified date matched the evening of May 14th. Not the notary, not an attorney, Dana. The woman who swore she was just helping organize things. I took a screenshot of the property's window, saved it to digital forensic. Then I sat back and let the weight of it settle. Between the bank transfers and the metadata, I had something Breck could hammer into the foundation of our case.by. Early afternoon, I was on the phone with him. "They moved the money before the will was even signed," I said. "And the document was created on Dana's laptop." He didn't waste words. "Send me everything. We'll subpoena the bank for full statements and the PDF's native file." This is premeditation. The word sat heavy in the air. Premeditation isn't just a legal term, it's intent, laid out in advance. Evelyn's trust had been dismantled before her pen supposedly touched the page. After I emailed the files, I drove to pick up Caleb. On the way back, he asked if we could stop for ice cream. We sat on the curb outside the shop, the late sun warm on our shoulders. He talked about building a fort in the backyard. I listened. Storing the moment away like evidence of a different kind, the kind you protect by dismantling threats quietly, thoroughly. That evening, I added a new entry to my binder. May 13 to 14, financial transfers precede alleged will signing. Digital file creation traced to Dana's laptop. Potential chain of custody breached. I slipped the page in next to the marigold petal Caleb had given me days earlier. Different kinds of proof, but both worth keeping. From the kitchen window, I could see the flowers catching the last light of the day. Evelyn used to say, "Roots don't lie." They show where you've really been. The bank statements, the metadata, they were roots. And I was finally mapping the soil. On Monday, I dropped Caleb at school and drove straight to the county law library. The building was quiet, its marble floors echoing under my shoes. I wasn't there to browse, I was there to arm myself. Nursing teaches you triage, assess, prioritize, act. Law, I was learning, required the same discipline. I started with probate. Procedure, flipping through thick volumes that smelled like dust and binding glue. Chain of custody, I learned how every document in an estate case needs a clear, provable path from signing to filing. If that chain breaks, the whole link of evidence can fail. Dana's PDF metadata was a brake you could drive a truck through. Next, attestation clauses. I'd never cared about them before. Now I saw how critical they were. A valid will's witnesses have to swear the signer was of sound mind and not under undue influence. If Dana was in Cabo on the date in question, her signature as a witness wasn't just suspicious, it was perjury. Then, notary journals. I didn't even know notaries kept them, but by law they had to, recording every notarization, who was present, and what ID was shown. If the notary's log didn't match the will's claims, that was another fracture. Breck had already filed to subpoena it. Now I understood why. I also learned what a cease and desist could do. Not just for defamation, but to stop asset distribution. If I could prove the transfers were based on a contested will. My notes were filling page after page, my handwriting cramping but relentless. At one point, the reference librarian, a woman with silver hair and sharp glasses, walked by and glanced at my stack of books. Estate fight, she asked. Forgery, I said. My voice was calm, like I was reporting a patient's vitals. She nodded once, slow. Make them prove every word. Then she kept walking. By early afternoon, I had a binder sectioned into tabs: forgery evidence, financial timeline, witness contradictions. Legal tools. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was building something. On the way out, I stopped at the copier to duplicate every page of my notes, one set for me, one for Breck. The clerk handed me the stack, and I felt that small shift again, the quiet power of knowing more today than I did yesterday. I drove to Caleb's school pickup with the binder riding shotgun. He hopped in, tossing his backpack in the back seat. You look different, he said, squinting at me, just focused. I told him that night, after he was asleep. I opened my laptop and typed a single sentence into my case file: knowledge is leverage. And leverage tilts the table. From the living room window, I could see the marigolds in the dark, faint outlines against the yard. Still standing. Still rooted. Just like me, only now, I wasn't just holding my ground. I was preparing to move. Breck's office was in a low brick building sandwiched between a tax preparer and a bail bond service. No receptionist, no fancy art, just a metal filing cabinet, a desk, and the faint smell of burnt coffee. He shook my hand once, sat, and opened a yellow legal pad. I read your emails, he said, no preamble. You have two things most clients don't: evidence and restraint. Don't lose either. I slid my binder across his desk. Bank transfers, metadata, forged signature analysis, witness alibi. In Cabo, hospice nurse statement. He flipped through, pausing at the side-by-side signature photos. Tremor versus trace, he read aloud. That's good. A jury understands that. Breck wasn't warm, but he was steady. His eyes didn't wander. Here's what we do first: contest the will formally, file for a temporary restraining order on asset transfers, subpoena the notary's journal, and demand full bank records. The less they can move, the less they can hide. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a blank subpoena template. I'm giving you this because I want you to understand the mechanics. We don't rage, we record. Every call, every text, every visit, you document it. No exceptions. I nodded. Already. Doing it. Good. Second, don't warn them. Surprise is leverage. If they think you're hesitating, they'll get sloppy. We spent 2 hours mapping the timeline. He asked pointed questions, dates, times, witnesses, never letting me drift into opinion. By the time I left, the plan was clean: file will contest. This week, secure assets, break the chain of custody in court. Outside, the air smelled like rain on hot concrete. I sat in my car, flipping through the subpoena form. Breck had written in the margin, "This is just paper. Your job is to make the paper mean something." When I picked Caleb up from a friend's house, he climbed in with a half-eaten granola bar and asked if I'd been at work. "Sort of," I said. "I'm making sure the right things end up in the right hands." That night, I cleared the dining table, lined up my folders, and wrote the word leverage on a sticky note. I pressed it to the front of the binder. The marigold petal inside was still intact. By the time I turned out the lights, the house felt different, not safer yet, but steadier. The kind of steadiness Evelyn had carried even in hospice, when she could barely hold my hand but still told me to keep my head. I was keeping it. And now, I had the tools to make sure they'd wish I hadn't. By Tuesday morning, Breck had drafted the will contest petition. It was stripped of emotion, just dates, exhibits, and statutory references, but the weight was in the attachments: Evelyn's genuine signatures, the bank transfer timeline, Dana's Cabo selfies, the hospice nurse affidavit. Every piece was numbered, tabbed, and ready. We filed it at 9:12 a.m. The clerk stamped each page, the sound sharp in the quiet room. When I stepped back outside, the air felt thinner, like we'd cracked the surface of something that had been sealed too long. By 10:30, Breck had also filed an emergency motion to freeze all estate assets. "They'll call it liquidating for taxes," he said, "but what they're doing is laundering inheritance into their own accounts. The freeze stops that cold." The motion went in with exhibits showing those May 13th transfers into the Carter Family Trust and Dana's personal account. The judge granted a temporary freeze pending hearing, 45 days. That same afternoon, Dana called. I didn't pick up. Her voicemail was clipped, almost brittle. "You've made a mistake, Paige. Evelyn wouldn't want this." I saved it to Dana. Coercion without listening twice. By evening, Mark had texted, "Hope you're happy. Caleb's going to hate you for this." I screenshotted it, filed it under Mark deflection. Breck's words echoed, "Don't rage, record.at home." I told Caleb only what he needed to know, that I was making sure the things Evelyn wanted for him stayed safe. He nodded and went back to building a Lego fort on the living room rug. After he was in bed, I sat at the dining table with the freeze order in front of me. It was just a stamped piece of paper, but to me, it felt like the first sandbag against a rising tide. I poured a glass of water, looked out the window at the marigolds. They didn't know anything about court orders or bank transfers, but they were still there, still upright. That was enough of a reminder: this wasn't victory, not yet. But it was movement. And movement changes the game. The subpoenas went out faster than I expected. Breck's paralegal, a quiet woman named Joanne, had a gift for extracting documents without stirring noise. By Friday, she slid a thick envelope across Breck's desk toward me. "These are from Mark's attorney," she said. "They should've looked them over more carefully before sending." Inside were printed email threads: Mark to Dana, Dana to a generic Gmail account, subject lines that felt like cracks in a wall. The earliest was dated May 6th. A week before the alleged signing, Evelyn will final _2.docs. Another, on May 8th, change trustee to me, cleaner. Every attachment was gone, stripped for privacy, but the file names alone told a story. If there was a final _final2, there had been a final one, and probably several drafts before that. I filed each page under draft control, chain of custody breach. The fact that these drafts existed before Evelyn's supposed consent undercut every claim they'd made about her wishes. The notary's journal was another story. Breck had subpoenaed it directly. The response we got was a typed letter: "Journal entry for May 14th is missing. Believed misplaced during office relocation." I stared at the paper. In my world, that was like losing a chart during a malpractice case. Convenient, but dangerous. Missing means it's either damning or they never had it, Breck said, leaning back in his chair. Either way, it's leverage. We'll ask the judge to infer why it's gone. That afternoon, I cross-checked the email dates with the bank transfer records. The May 6th email about the trustee change came 2 days before the first unexplained withdrawal. That wasn't just bad optics, it was a sequence you could build. An entire opening statement on a Mark called twice that night. I let both go to voicemail. The second was almost snarled, "You don't know what you're doing. Walk away before you burn every bridge." I saved it to mark deflection. Breck once told me that threats from people who think they still control you are just proof you're hitting the right pressure points. When Caleb came in from the yard, his hands were dirty from digging. "I made the marigolds a little wall," he said proudly. "So the wind can't knock them down." I looked at him, my son, Evelyn's grandson, and thought of the freeze order, the draft will emails, the missing journal. Walls against the wind. That's exactly what we were building. Mark's pattern had always been predictable. When money control slipped, he reached for Caleb. He never said the words directly, but his meaning was clear: if I didn't cooperate, visitation would suddenly become inflexible in ways that favored him. Breck saw it coming before Mark even made his first move. "We file for a temporary custody stability order," he said, flipping to a fresh page on his legal pad. "It locks the schedule. No games. No retaliation." The filing was straightforward but heavy with subtext. We attached Mark's text about Caleb hating me for this, and Dana's voicemail urging me to think of the child. Both went into the exhibit list as evidence of potential coercion. At the hearing, Mark showed up in his best, concerned father suit. He leaned against the counsel table like we were still in some private conversation. The judge didn't bite. Breck spoke in short, precise bursts, pattern of threats. History of using parenting time as leverage. Asset litigation pending, heightened risk of retaliation. Mark's attorney tried to argue that I was overreacting, and that flexibility was good for a child. Breck didn't raise his voice. "Flexibility is fine," he said, "when it's mutual. In this case, it's unilateral and tied to unrelated legal disputes. That's not parenting, it's bargaining." The judge signed the order. Effective immediately, the custody schedule was locked in place, enforceable with contempt penalties. Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me when we left the courtroom. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Breck handed me a copy of the order. "You just removed his favorite tool," he said. "Expect him to get creative with others." That night, Caleb built another Lego fort, this one bigger than the last. "It needs stronger walls," he said, "because the wind's louder today." I smiled and told him the walls would hold. I and my binder, I added a new tab, custody protections. Inside, the order sat on top of the bank freeze, the will contest, the subpoena responses. Each was a wall of its own, and together, they were starting to form something unshakable. From the window, the marigolds were visible in the porch light, swaying but not bending. Roots and walls, they were what kept everything standing. Mediation was supposed to be the civilized step before a courtroom battle. We met in a bland conference room, neutral walls, neutral carpet, neutral coffee. The mediator, a middle-aged man in a navy blazer, opened with the same line I'd heard in the hallway: "We're here to find common ground." Dana arrived in a cream suit, pearls at her throat, every hair in place. Mark sat beside her, pretending. This was about compromise, not survival. The first hour was predictable. Dana talked about preserving family harmony and avoiding public ugliness. Mark nodded along, occasionally sighing like this was all beneath him. I let them talk. Breck did too, he just kept jotting notes in his careful, angular handwriting. Then Dana dropped her line. Evelyn wanted the house to feel young again. She told me herself, fresh energy, fresh ownership. That's why she put it in my name in the new will. It was a performance, soft voice, misty eyes, but the mediator surprised me. He leaned forward, flipping through his copy of the will. "Interesting," he said, "because page 3 uses a font that wasn't installed on Evelyn's home computer. Our IT check confirmed it's a newer version." Dana blinked. "I don't know about fonts." Breck slid a printed screenshot across the table. "Metadata confirms the file. Was created on your laptop, Dana, on May 14th at 9:46 p.m. You were in Cabo that day, according to your own social media. Do you want to explain that for the record? Her face tightened, just a fraction, but enough. Mark shifted in his chair, eyes darting between us. The mediator cleared his throat. Given these inconsistencies, I'd recommend we move forward. Assuming this may require judicial review. Which was polite for, this is going to court. Dana tried to pivot. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just helping with formatting. Breck didn't even look up. Formatting isn't witnessing. We broke for lunch shortly after. In the hallway, Mark caught up to me. You're making this worse than it has to be, he said quietly. I met his eyes. Worse for who? He didn't answer. By the end of the day, the mediator had sent us home without an agreement. That was fine. Every minute Dana spent talking was another minute her story shifted. Every shift was another crack in her mask. That night, Caleb helped me water the marigolds. They look the same, he said. Sometimes, I told him, things look the same right before they fall over. The first probate hearing drew more people than I expected. Family disputes over money have a way of attracting spectators, some curious, some eager for gossip. I walked in with Breck, binder under my arm, and kept my gaze straight ahead. Mark and Dana were already seated at the respondents' table. Dana wore another cream suit, this one sharper, with a gold pin at the collar. Mark leaned back like he was still in control, but the tightness around his mouth gave him away. The judge called us to order, and Breck began by introducing our exhibits, the bank transfers, the Cabo alibi, the missing notary journal. But the turning point came when he moved to Exhibit 14, the signature comparison. The clerk dimmed the lights, and the projector lit up with Evelyn's two signatures side by side, the authentic one, left-leaning, breathing, and the forged one, too perfect, the capital E flaring in the wrong direction. The image was so enlarged that you could see the paper fibers under the ink. Breck's voice was calm. Your Honor, this is not just a difference in style. This is a difference in origin. One was written by a living hand, the other traced, consistent. Pressure throughout, no tremor, no variation. He stepped back. We will show further that this alleged signature was affixed on a date when Evelyn Carter was under heavy sedation, and that the document itself originated from the respondent Dana Carter's personal computer while she was out of the country. The judge turned to Dana. Ms. Carter, can you explain this? Dana's lips parted, but no sound came out. Somewhere in the back of the room, the bailiff coughed, loud, abrupt. It filled the silence she left hanging. Finally, she said, I was helping organize her affairs. Formatting documents. I didn't. That's enough, the judge said, holding up a hand. You'll have the opportunity to testify under oath. Mark shifted beside her, eyes down. For the first time, his posture didn't read as relaxed, it read as cornered. When the lights came back on, I felt the shift in the room. It wasn't victory yet, but the weight had moved. The signature, projected 10 feet tall, had said what I didn't need to. Outside the courthouse, reporters loitered, sniffing for scandal. I ignored them, walking straight to my car. Breck slid in beside me and shut the door. That, he said, was the first nail. At home, Caleb was sprawled on the living room floor, drawing. I made the flowers bigger this time, he said, showing me a marigold that took up the whole page. Good, I told him. Bigger's harder to ignore. The second hearing was shorter but sharper, Breck's kind of day. We'd subpoenaed the notary, a woman named Carol Mason, who took the stand with stiff shoulders and a manila folder clutched in both hands. Breck's first question was simple, Ms. Mason, did you notarize Evelyn Carter's will on May 14th of this year? Her answer landed like a dropped glass. No. My seal was stolen in March. I reported it to the police the same day. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Breck let the silence stretch before speaking again. Do you have documentation of that report? Carol opened her folder and pulled out a copy of the theft report, date, time, case number. The officer's signature was visible at the bottom. Breck took the page, held it up for the judge, and then, without looking at me, slid another document from his briefcase. It was the same police report, already certified and stamped. I hadn't known he had it. That was Breck's style. Hold the blade until the moment you need to cut, Your Honor, he said. This means the notary seal on the contested will could not have been applied by Ms. Mason. The only possible explanation is unauthorized use, what we might also call fraud. Mark's attorney stood, objecting that we were jumping to conclusions. The judge overruled him almost immediately. Dana's face didn't move, but her hands twisted together in her lap. Mark stared at the table, jaw tight. Breck pressed on. And to be clear, Ms. Mason, you have no record in your official journal of witnessing Evelyn Carter's signature? Correct, she said. If it's in there, it's forged. But it's not. That date is blank. The judge leaned back. All right. I think we've established the seriousness of the claim. We'll set a trial date for full testimony. Outside, the air felt thinner, brighter. Breck walked beside me down the courthouse steps. You don't have to see the knife to know you've been cut, he said quietly. But sometimes it helps to show everyone the blade. When I got home, Caleb was in the yard, the little brick wall he'd built around the marigolds now 2 rows higher. Stronger, he told me, brushing dirt from his hands. I looked at the flowers, steady, protected, and thought of the seal, the police report, and the hands that had stolen something they thought no one would trace. They were wrong. The trial date came faster than I expected, but by then the momentum was ours. Breck's opening was as stripped and cold as the January air outside. This case is about paper, yes, but more than that, it is about truth that can be measured, dated, and proven beyond evasion. We laid out the bank transfers, the Cabo alibi, the missing notary journal, the metadata, the signature analysis, and, finally, the stolen seal police report. Each piece landed without drama, but the accumulation was heavy. Mark's attorney objected, rephrased, tried to cast doubt on timing. It didn't matter. The sequence spoke for itself: assets moved, will drafted, signature traced, and all while Evelyn lay sedated in hospice. Dana took the stand briefly, her voice brittle. She repeated her formatting help a defense, but under cross-examination, Breck asked the one question she couldn't answer: why did your laptop create the will file if Evelyn dictated it to an attorney? Her silence was longer than the judge's patience. The notary testified again, confirming the blank entry in her journal for the supposed signing date. The police report was admitted without objection this time. Closing arguments were short. Breck didn't bother with sentiment. You don't have to speculate about intent, he said. You just have to follow the trail of documents. Every stop along the way points to the same conclusion: this will was not signed by Evelyn Carter, and those who claim it was have a vested interest in making that falsehood stick. The judge took a recess before ruling. When she returned, her tone was brisk, almost clinical. The court finds the contested will invalid and void. The last valid will, dated March 2018, is hereby restored. Furthermore, this matter is referred to the county prosecutor for review of potential criminal charges relating to forgery, fraud, and unlawful transfer of assets. The words were precise, but to me, they landed like winter sunlight, cold, clean, and clarifying. Dana didn't look at me as we gathered our things. Mark glanced up once, but whatever he meant to say died before it reached his mouth. Outside, the air was sharp enough to sting. Breck handed me a copy of the judgment, the paper warm from the printer. Now we secure the transfer before they try anything else, he said. When I got home, Caleb was doing homework at the table. I set the judgment down beside him. Does this mean they can't take the house? He asked. It means, I told him, the house stays exactly where it belongs. The judgment was only the first cut, execution was where it bled. Breck moved fast. Within a week, the clerk recorded the transfer of Evelyn's house to me in trust for Caleb until he turns 25, exactly as the restored 2018 will instructed. No more trustee discretion, no more open doors for Dana to reinterpret Evelyn's words. We also filed for disbursement of my share of the liquid assets, what remained after the freeze. The judge approved it with an addendum, sanctions against Mark and Dana for willful misrepresentation. The number wasn't small. I knew it wouldn't ruin them, but it would sting every time they checked a bank balance at the title office. I signed the property deed transfer with steady hands. The clerk smiled faintly as she notarized the paperwork. Big day, she said. Yes, I told her. Bigger than they realize. The bank meeting was more procedural, of funds moving into an account under the trust's name, locked with dual controls. Caleb's college fund was reinstated, its balance restored to what Evelyn had originally planned. I watched the teller type the figures, each keystroke a quiet reversal of weeks of theft. That evening, Mark texted. So you win. Was it worth it? I didn't reply. Breck's advice still applied, silence is leverage. Instead, I screenshotted it, filed it under Mark, deflection, and went back to helping Caleb with his science project. The house felt different now, less like a place I was defending and more like a place I owned in fact, not just in function. I walked through each room after Caleb went to bed, touching the walls, the windowsills. In Evelyn's old bedroom, I opened the curtains and let the night air in on the dresser. A photo of her and Caleb from 2 summers ago sat in a wooden frame. Both were smiling at the camera, marigolds bright behind them. The bravado Mark and Dana had leaned on for months was expensive now, legally, financially, and in whatever remained of their reputations. And me? I had what Evelyn wanted me to have, secured properly, no loopholes left for them to pry open. When I locked the front door that night, the click felt final in a way it hadn't before. The custody stability order we'd filed earlier had been temporary, good for locking Mark out of his favorite bargaining chip during the will contest. But with the judgment in hand, Breck pushed to make it permanent. Clean lines, he said, sliding the proposed agreement across his desk toward me. Exact days, exact times. Neutral exchange location. No room for interpretation. We met in a small family court conference room to finalize it. Mark was already seated when I walked in, his attorney beside him. He didn't look up right away. The table between us was covered in copies, my copy, his copy, the court's copy, each page flagged where signatures were required. The judge came in briefly, confirmed both parties understood the terms, and left us to execute the paperwork. I picked up the pen first. My hand was steady, each signature clean and deliberate. Mark took longer. He glanced at the language about no unilateral schedule changes, and written notice for any adjustments. His jaw tightening, but he signed anyway. When it was done, the clerk gathered the papers, stamped them, and handed us each a certified copy. Mark slid his into a folder without a word. As we walked out, he muttered, "You've made things harder than they needed to be." I stopped just long enough to look at him. "No," I said. "I've made them clear." That afternoon, I took Caleb to the park. He raced ahead to the swings, laughing in a way I hadn't heard from him in months. Watching him, I thought about the years of small encroachments, Mark holding the keys to my home, Dana deciding which invitations I'd get, both of them believing boundaries were negotiable if they pushed hard enough. Now the boundaries were in ink, enforceable by law. There would be no more borrowed keys, no more unreturned access. That night, when I locked the front door, I dropped the deadbolt, pocketed the key, and knew it was the only 1.2 days after the custody agreement was finalized. I called a locksmith. He arrived mid-morning in a van that smelled faintly of machine oil, his tools clinking in a canvas bag. Within an hour, every lock in the house was replaced, front door, back door, garage entry. New metal, new tumblers, new keys cut in sets of 2. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table with the spare key in my hand. I'd lived here for years, but this was the first time I knew, beyond doubt, that every door opened only for me and Caleb. Next, I pulled up the emergency contact forms for Caleb's school and pediatrician. Mark's name came off both. The receptionist at the clinic didn't ask why, just updated the file and said, "Got it." It felt cleaner than I expected, like clearing a file of outdated information. Then I went to the living room mantel. From the small drawer in the coffee table, I took the key Mark had never returned, the one I'd pocketed the day he slid that forged will across my kitchen table. I slipped it into a plain white envelope. No note. No explanation. I left it on the mantel where he'd see it the next time he came to pick up Caleb for his scheduled visitation. That evening, after Caleb was asleep, I stood in the living room with the lights low. The envelope was still there, silent, unassuming. But it was the heaviest thing in the room. Heavy with years of intrusion disguised as familiarity, with access assumed instead of earned. When Mark arrived the next day, he glanced at it, recognized the shape, and didn't touch it. He looked at me once, then down at the floor, and walked out without a word. The door closed behind him. The deadbolt slid home with a solid click. I turned toward the window. Outside, the marigolds swayed in the evening breeze, roots deep, stems upright, blooms unshaken. The severing wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. When this began, they thought I would fold. They counted on exhaustion, on the slow erosion of years spent navigating single motherhood, night shifts, and the unspoken rule that family harmony was worth more than fairness. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence was never surrender. It was strategy. Piece by piece, I learned the language they used to keep me out: probate codes, custody orders, chain of custody, metadata. I learned how to freeze an account before the money vanished, how to prove a signature lied, how to force someone to answer under oath when their story cracked. Every step forward was another wall built, not just around the house or the trust, but around Caleb's future. The walls weren't built of spite. They were built of clarity. Mark lost his ability to use parenting time as a weapon. Dana lost the house she thought she'd claimed. Both lost the comfort of assuming I didn't know how to fight. And Evelyn's name, her real wishes, were pulled back into the light, away from the paper they tried to bury them under. People talk about winning like it's a trophy you hold. It's not. It's the absence of intrusion, the steady hum of a life no one else can rewrite. It's knowing the front door lock turns only for you. It's watching your child play without the shadow of negotiations hanging over him. The marigolds in the yard are still standing. Their blooms have weathered wind, rain, and neglect. They didn't shout to survive, they just stayed rooted. I think Evelyn knew that's what I'd have to do. Stay rooted. Let them come with wind and bluster. And when the storm passed, still be here. I'm here. And they'll never get in again. Some locks aren't made of metal, they're made of finally knowing you don't owe anyone a key.